What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we're talking about the brand new Disney live action remake, this time around for The Little Mermaid. Directed by Rob Marshall and written by David McGee, this film stars people like Halle Bailey, Jonah Hauer-King, Melissa McCarthy, Javier Bardem, Daveed Diggs, and many, many more. So it's been a long road getting to this Little Mermaid film. There was a lot of controversy when this film was first announced and when it was first cast, of course, because we have Halle Bailey in the role as Ariel. Of course, a character that's iconic for being a white redhead character from the 1989 film, simply titled The Little Mermaid. And I've been an advocate for the Disney live action films here on the channel and just in general in my life. When they first started to kind of do these reimaginings and Disney flat out remakes with things like Maleficent or the Cinderella that they did back in the day, as well as things like the Jungle Book and so many others that they've done at this point, I was really all about it, mainly because I grew up watching these films and I was really interested in seeing live action interpretations of these films that I enjoyed. And more often than not, they never really came close to the impact I ever felt watching the original films over the course of my life, nor did they ever have that timeless classic kind of feel to them that made these films rewatchable over and over and over again. And I would say for the most part, none of them have really hit that level, except for me with the 2016 Jungle Book film, which I would argue is the only one of the remakes or reimaginings that is better than the original film. If you haven't watched the original Jungle Book in a while and you think I'm crazy for saying that, go back and revisit it. It's a lot slower than you may think. It's got those iconic songs and those iconic moments, but that 2016 Jungle Book is pretty great. But I've covered a few here on the channel as they've released, or at least the ones that have come out since I've had this channel, and for the most part I've enjoyed a lot of them. I've enjoyed what they've done with these films. I've enjoyed kind of seeing an alternate interpretation to these stories that I'm familiar with. And so going into The Little Mermaid, unfortunately though, I was a little bit worried about it, to say the least. And I think a lot of that mainly has to do with the last few Disney live action remakes not really being something that super excited me, specifically things like last year's Pinocchio, and even not that long ago with things like Peter Pan and Wendy, which I thought was pretty mediocre. And so here we are now with this film that, as we got closer and I started seeing the trailers more and more, I was always kind of on the fence on whether or not I was really intrigued by the film, or if it was something that was only really pulling me in solely based on my nostalgia for that original film. And I'm definitely a fan of the original Little Mermaid film. It's a film that I've seen countless times, and it's a film that I've always enjoyed how it's integrated into the theme parks. There's the show at Hollywood Studios, and just in general the score and just this character has been embedded in things like the Kingdom Hearts video games that I've enjoyed as well. And overall, I've just always had a lot of nostalgia for the Little Mermaid. So going into this, I was definitely curious to see what this movie was going to be all about in terms of how well it was going to execute this story and how much new they were going to bring to the table. And after having seen it, I'm happy to say I had a good time with it. Now going into it, I had already started to see some early reviews from critics online that I follow, as well as a lot of my peers who also do film criticism, who got to see the film substantially early. And the overall kind of thing I was hearing from people was that this was one of, if not the best live action Disney film, and that it was definitely one of the better ones, or something that was really gonna, kind of relight the fire for a lot of people if you've been concerned when it comes to these Disney live action remakes. And unfortunately, I don't wholly agree with that entirely, but I am happy to say I enjoyed the film. I thought it was a good time. I would rather watch the original film from 1989 any day of the week. I do think that this film is a nice homage to that original film in a lot of ways. I do think that this film has a lot of great moments that definitely, again, pays tribute to where this legacy of this franchise has come from, and in a lot of ways is its own thing that includes some new songs and some new story beats, expanding upon the original story. But I think overall, I just found it to be a good time that never really came close to the same charm level and excitement that I get watching the original film, but definitely had its own identity for a modern generation. And this is definitely an iteration of the story I see a lot of young kids today will definitely latch onto, and will likely become the iteration for a lot of people who are watching it for the very first time around this time. So while I do feel like I enjoy the original more, while I do feel like it's a good movie, but not the best Disney live action remake. I certainly think that it's a movie that a lot of people that are watching this movie in this modern day and age are going to really enjoy and have a lot of fun with. So I think it's really just going to depend on your taste and what you want out of this film. And if this is something that you're taking your kids to and it's their very first Little Mermaid film, I do think that they're going to have a lot of fun with it. So let's talk about some of the things I really enjoyed about this film. And the number one thing I think that everybody's going to be talking about when it comes to this film is Halle Bailey as the title character, the Little Mermaid, Ariel. I thought she was great in the film. Really thoroughly enjoyed her performance throughout. I thought that she definitely gave off that charisma and charm that the character had in the original film. I do think I still enjoyed Jodie Benson's version of the character. There was a bit of a more whimsical nature to her character, a lot more awe and shock when it came to her experiences over the course of the film. And I think that a lot of that comes to the animation overall, but I do feel like Jodie Benson's performance in that original film just kind of added to that. But I thought Halle Bailey was great here. I think she's a great new iteration of the character of Ariel. I think a lot of young girls are going to really enjoy seeing this iteration of the character. And one of my favorite things leading up to this film coming out was seeing some of those videos coming out online of young black girls being able to see a commercial or the trailer for this and seeing that the Little Mermaid this time around was a black girl. I thought that was great. I thought it was a really touching thing, and it was a nice moment for me to realize that a lot of people were just freaking out about something that's going to mean a lot to the people that this film is for, which is young girls, young kids in general. Though there are a lot of fans of the original film that are going to come watch this movie like myself, I do recognize that this is being made for a different generation in mind, and being able to see some of those videos was really, just really nice. It put a smile on my face to see those young girls get so excited to see somebody like themselves in such a popular role. But as far as Halle Bailey's performance on its own, I thought she was great. She was charismatic, she was fun, she was whimsical, and she had a great vocal performances throughout the course of the film. And overall, she's definitely the star of the movie. My second most favorite thing of this film actually is Melissa McCarthy as Ursula, which was something I honestly was very surprised by, because I was a little bit worried about Melissa McCarthy as Ursula. She's a really solid actress who's done great comedic work in the past, but when it comes to playing such a big, charismatic, and almost animated character, not to just say animated because of the movie, but just because the character is so animated in her movements and her smile and everything, I was a little bit concerned. Now, where I do think Melissa McCarthy really shines here is in her voice work, where I think that she really matches the sound, the tone, and the feel of that original Ursula from the original film. However, I do feel at times her physical performance didn't necessarily match the vocal performance, and there were moments where I wish that she had a little bit more of that creep factor that you get from the original Ursula. That original Ursula has a killer grin, it's evil, it's sinister, and in this film, while there's a lot of smirks and some smiles and some crazy cackling that you get from Melissa McCarthy, I never really ever felt physically that just menacing presence of Ursula that you see in that original film, which often made me feel a little bit kind of disconnected from this iteration of Ursula, though I still really enjoyed Melissa McCarthy's performance. And then my third best thing in this film for me is Daveed Diggs as Sebastian. And when they were coming out with this movie and they were announcing things, I didn't give a damn that Little Mermaid this time around was gonna be black. I really didn't care. But the only thing I knew I needed this movie to have was a crab that is Jamaican, and thankfully that was the case here. And I think that Daveed Diggs does a good job of bringing Sebastian to the screen. I'll be honest in saying that I think the voice work for the original film and the iterations of all those characters from the original film are something that still were far superior, in my opinion, to the versions that we saw here. But I really enjoyed Daveed Diggs as the character, and the character Sebastian is given a lot to do over the course of the film, as he is in the original film. But because this film is a little bit longer than that original film, they're able to expand upon a lot of these story beats and a lot of the comedic moments, add some new songs in the mix, and I think that Daveed Diggs did a great job playing the character Sebastian. He was really funny throughout. A lot of the moments that actually got me to chuckle or laugh throughout the course of the film came from the character of Sebastian, played by Daveed Diggs, as well as also Scuttle, played by Awkwafina, who I thought did a great job. Awkwafina is an actress that tends to kind of get put in a box, or a lot of people don't really enjoy her comedic presence at times because she can be a little bit loud and a bit over the top. But I felt that Awkwafina's voice and her overall acting style worked perfectly for the character of Scuttle here, who's supposed to kind of be loud and over the top, a little bit obnoxious, and I feel like it really fit the character, and you're able to kind of like shut off your mind to it being Awkwafina in a way, even though her voice is 110% recognizable. You also have Jacob Tremblay as Flounder, and Flounder this time around for me was a little bit disappointing because in the original film, while he's not the biggest presence in every single moment, his time spent with Ariel is really felt in that original film. Their friendship is really felt as well. And while I do feel like Jacob Tremblay is a fantastic actor and I really enjoyed the voice work he gave here, I never really felt that Flounder was all that pivotal to the narrative. It felt more like he was just kind of around for a lot of things. Even if I enjoyed just having him around from time to time, I just never really felt that Flounder was as impactful as he was for me in the original film. And then the other most notable person to talk about here is Javier Bardem as King Triton, and I think he does a pretty good job throughout the course of the film. In a lot of ways though, it feels like Javier Bardem was kind of showing up a little bit for a paycheck, where I never really felt like he gave it his all. And this is mainly coming from a fan of Javier Bardem, who I've seen him give absolutely phenomenal performances in other films. And while I don't think his performance in this film is bad in any way, shape, or form, there was actually a sequence in this film near the very end that got a huge laugh from the audience that I don't necessarily think was supposed to get a laugh, and it was just because the scene felt a little bit stilted. And that would be my biggest issue with this film. While I've touched on some of the positives and the characters that I've enjoyed in this film, even if there's some things I didn't enjoy, I think where this film kind of didn't work for me at times is it felt like a rigid retelling of that original film from time to time. It took until about the halfway point of this movie for me to really be sold on the film overall, because whether it's the CGI or the rushed pace of the first act or some of the kind of cringy moments of dialogue, there were some things about this film that just didn't work for me overall. I think there's going to be some people who just love the film, but overall I just think in the modern day there were some elements about the CGI that took me out of the film. There were moments of some of the dialogue that felt a little bit just kind of rigid. There was something about it that could have used a little bit more chemistry, could have used a little bit more fluidity. And that's not to say that I think the performers in this film were bad. I just do think that there were some moments in the direction where there was so much CGI that you can tell they didn't necessarily know what they were looking at, where to look, and how to necessarily perform these lines, or how the lines that were being said back to them by an animated character was going to be said. So sometimes it felt like some of that dialogue lacked a little bit of that natural chemistry that you would get from two actors sitting across from one another, and it also kind of sometimes made some of these moments feel, like I mentioned, rigid, a little bit stilted, you know, and that was something that kind of took me out of the film from time to time. But yeah, beyond those things, I thought it was a fun, good time. It's nothing that's necessarily going to blow your socks off. If you've seen the original Little Mermaid film, this is that retold to you like a lot of the other films, that takes a lot of those big moments and kind of gives it to you in a shot-for-shot way, with some new iterations of some songs in here, some new things that are added on, and like I said, it's longer than that original film, so it does expand upon the narrative in certain areas. There are things about it that I think could have been a little bit better. There's definitely some things I would have liked to have seen in terms of some story expansion and some of the dialogue, as well as some of the character work, and specifically the CGI, that I think really could have made this film really work. If there was something that took me out of it the most, genuinely, my biggest negative, honestly, it would be the CGI, and I would say mainly because this film comes after so many Disney live action films that have had some substantial CGI. And I would argue with those films, something like The Jungle Book or something like The Lion King or even something like Peach Dragon, that those films were maybe going for a little bit more realism than this film. This film feels far more like a live action cartoon, more so than a cartoon being brought to live action. You know, The Lion King, one of the biggest criticisms that film has is that it's so photorealistic that it often takes away from the charm and the kind of chemistry between the characters, because you can't add a lot of emotion to those characters' faces because they look so hyper realistic. And then I think The Jungle Book for me was a good mix, where those characters were able to still be realistic looking while having some sort of animation to the face, but the CGI on all of those creatures looks phenomenal. And there are moments in this film where just the characters' bodies and their hair and their face didn't always sync up so well. Some of the CGI was just so cartoony that it often took me out of it. But then there were other creatures that would appear throughout the course of the film from time to time that looked far more realistic. So there was a bit of an inconsistency for me in terms of the visuals of this film. It's colorful, it's vibrant, it doesn't necessarily look bad, but in terms of other films we're getting in the modern day when it comes to CGI, specifically the other films we've gotten in the last decade from Disney themselves for these live action remakes, there were a couple of moments where I thought to myself, oh man, the CGI looks just like so cartoony. It almost looked like a PS3 or Xbox 360. Really good cutscene, like a good cutscene, but just something that's noticeably computer generated. And then you have these actors in the mix with these computer generated bodies that are partially computer generated, and then their hair is computer generated, but then their face isn't, but you kind of have to have a blend. And there was just a couple of moments where the CGI overall took me out of the film and could have been polished a little bit better, in my opinion, for a studio this big and for a, production of this level. And I think that maybe I'm a little bit spoiled by saying this, but after seeing Avatar: The Way of Water, which of course had way more time to make that movie and was a far more expensive film, I feel like, you kind of up the stakes a little bit when it comes to underwater films in terms of how good underwater sequences can look. And when I look at something like Aquaman now or something like this, it just definitely stands out as not as good as what we know is possible with modern day CGI from big budget studios. But with all of that said, I do think the Little Mermaid remake was a good time. I think that it was a fun time at the theaters. If you are nostalgic for the original film, like myself, I think you're going to enjoy the film. If you're somebody who has not been a fan of these remakes at all and you just don't want to see these stories retold to you, then I don't necessarily know that there's going to be something here that's going to kind of, reinvent the reel for you or get you re-excited. This is The Little Mermaid retold as a lot of the other Disney live action films have done, with some new songs and some new story beats to expand upon that original movie. There are elements about it that I enjoyed a lot, but overall, personally, I would rewatch the original film from 1989 any day of the week. But that's going to be my thoughts on The Little Mermaid 2023. Definitely leave your comments down below. Did you guys like this movie? Did you not like this movie? Where does this rank for you when it comes to the Disney live action remakes? And which one do you prefer, the remake or the original from 1989? Definitely leave a comment down below, and I'll see you beautiful people in the next one. Bye-bye.